My name is Elise Harmon, and I was kicked out of my own house on the night of my high school graduation. I remember the sound first, the yelling, the crying, the frantic footsteps on the hardwood floor. I had just walked back in with my cap and gown still in my hand, still holding a little piece of pride that I had earned for myself. But the moment I crossed the threshold, it disappeared. My sister was sitting in the middle of the living room, clutching her chest like her heart was breaking apart. She was sobbing loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. My mother was beside her, holding her, whispering that everything would be all right as long as everyone stayed calm. Then she looked at me, and her voice was sharp enough to cut through bone when she told me that I was being cruel, that I was selfish for choosing to be at my graduation instead of being at home. My father did not say much. He just stood near the doorway waiting for me to react, waiting for the scene to tilt in one direction or the other. I stepped back outside. The porch light cast a warm glow across the wooden boards, but all I felt was the cold. The house had never felt like mine, not really. It belonged to a family of 3 that had never truly included me. I saw it clearly in that moment with the door closed behind me and their voices muffled. This is the story of how I left quietly, and how everything they tried to protect eventually collapsed without me. If you want to hear exactly how it happened, stay with me. Do not skip. The truth comes next. Growing up in Boulder taught me many things long before I could name them. The mountains around the city seemed steady and unchanging, but inside our house everything shifted depending on one person. My sister Selena had a way of filling every room without even trying. When she laughed, everyone listened. When she cried, the world stopped. When she wanted something, the rest of us adjusted in silence. I learned early that my place in the family depended on making sure she stayed calm. Mom never said it in a sharp or cruel way. It always came as a soft request, almost tender. If there were 2 cupcakes left, Mom would place the bigger one in front of Selena with a smile, and then look at me as if she expected me to understand. When we watched movies, the remote stayed in Selena's hand. If we were choosing clothes for school pictures, the nicer outfit always went to her first, even if it had been picked out for me. Mom would put her hand on my shoulder and whisper that keeping things peaceful was more important than little moments like these. She said I was strong enough to handle small disappointments. She said Selena was more sensitive. I heard the message behind it long before I understood how it shaped me. Dad rarely contradicted Mom. He believed quiet meant harmony, even if the quiet came from swallowing hurt. He would sit at the dinner table nodding along, never raising his voice, never disagreeing in front of us. He told me once that families survived by keeping the most emotional person stable. I think he meant it as wisdom. To me, it felt like a rule I had no choice but to follow. I learned to fold myself smaller in order to keep the house steady. I stopped asking for the last piece of anything. I stopped arguing when something felt unfair. I accepted hand-me-downs without question and let my preferences disappear before they had a chance to form. When I brought home art projects from school, they were placed on the fridge for a day or 2, until Selena had a performance, a competition, or even just a new hairstyle she wanted everyone to admire. Then my drawings quietly slipped into a drawer. Not thrown away, just removed. Out of sight, out of attention. The strange part was that none of it felt dramatic while it was happening. It felt ordinary. I grew used to being the quiet one, the reasonable one, the one who could understand. I thought this was what it meant to be part of a family. I believed that love required giving up space so someone else could breathe. There was only one person who saw something different. My Aunt Evelyn visited often when I was young. She never interfered, never challenged my parents, never spoke against the way the house operated. But she watched. When Selena ran the show, Aunt Evelyn noticed how I stepped back. When Mom handed out portions or decisions, she saw the pattern. Sometimes when we were alone in the kitchen, she would ask gentle questions like whether I liked the cupcake I did not choose, or if there was something else I would have preferred to do that weekend. I did not know how to answer her then. I only knew how to smile and say everything was fine. She did not push further, but her eyes always softened in a way that made me feel exposed. Looking back now, I realize she understood what I was learning to hide. The shape of my place in the family had already been formed long before graduation night. I had been trained to stand at the edge of every moment. I had been taught that the peace of the house depended on my silence. I carried that lesson for years before I ever thought to question it. 2 months before graduation, the air in our house changed in a way that felt subtle at first. I spent most evenings sitting at the small desk in my room shaping the words for my commencement speech. The ceremony committee had chosen me to speak something that should have filled the house with celebration, yet I prepared in quiet. I wanted the speech to carry the weight of what this milestone meant not only for me, but for the years of effort that had silently stacked behind it. I wrote, revised, and read aloud to an empty room, searching for a tone that felt both honest and steady. During that time, something in Selena began to falter. She had always moved through the world with confidence, yet her relationship ended unexpectedly, and the breakup struck her in a way that none of us anticipated. She came home late one afternoon, eyes red, voice trembling, saying that everything she believed about herself had collapsed. She said she felt unwanted, overlooked, and uncertain of her future. The intensity of her grief filled the house. Closing doors, silencing routines, reshaping priorities overnight. Mom responded immediately. She sat beside Selena hour after hour, offering tea blankets and murmured reassurances. She told her that heartbreak was an injury that required attention, that life had been unfair to her, that she deserved more gentleness. The house seemed to pivot around Selena again, not through deliberate favoritism, but through instinct. I recognized the familiar shift in gravity, the one that asked the rest of us to stay very still so nothing would break further. I did not resent her. I understood pain well enough to know it deserved space. Yet during those weeks, my speech drafts remained unmentioned at the dinner table, and no one asked how my preparations were unfolding. I continued to work quietly, though sometimes a tightness formed in my chest, a reminder of how easily my achievements slipped into the background when another need emerged. My friend Noah noticed the change before I said anything aloud. We met during free periods in the library where he helped me practice pacing and emphasis for the speech. He listened with patience that did not ask for anything in return. One afternoon, he looked at me for a long moment and asked if I felt seen at home. His question unsettled me because of how precise it was. I told him that families had patterns and mine had learned to bend toward the person who struggled most. He nodded, not offering solutions, just staying beside me without pressing for anything deeper. His presence created a space where I did not need to minimize myself. Around the same time, my Aunt Evelyn began visiting more frequently. She watched without judgment, noticing how I held myself still while the household revolved around Selena's hurt. One evening, while Selena rested upstairs and the house felt unusually quiet, Evelyn asked me what I truly wanted from the days ahead. I tried to respond with something practical or polite, but she shook her head gently and waited. The question was not about schedules or plans. It was about identity. The answer did not come immediately. I realized I had spent so many years adjusting to the emotional weather of the house that my own desires had become indistinct. I could articulate obligations and responsibilities, yet, when asked about what mattered to me alone, I hesitated. That silence revealed more than any confession. The weeks continued and I kept shaping my speech. Not out of duty, but as a way to trace the outline of a self I had not yet fully claimed. I wrote sentences that acknowledged struggle without naming its source. I practiced speaking in a voice that did not vanish when someone else needed the room. Those 2 months did not feel dramatic at the time. They felt like slow, steady shifts, like the quiet cracking of something long settled. I did not know yet what would happen on graduation night, but a part of me had already begun to move toward the possibility of choosing myself. 1 week before graduation, the tension in our house became impossible to ignore. The announcement came during a morning assembly at school. I had been selected to deliver the student speech at the ceremony. It was not a surprise to my teachers. They had seen me volunteer, stay late, take extra responsibilities, tutor others quietly. Yet when the principal said my name, I felt a tremor of disbelief inside me, as if I needed permission to feel proud of it. I stood there while students clapped, and I tried to imagine telling my family without dread rising like a shadow behind the thought. When I returned home that afternoon, Selena was in the kitchen scrolling through her phone. I set my bag down and told her about the announcement. She froze in place for a moment, her expression flickering before settling into something unreadable. She congratulated me, but there was no warmth in it. Later that evening, I overheard her telling someone on the phone that I was trying to steal the spotlight, that I had been waiting for this chance to make everything about me. Her voice trembled, and I recognized the tone she used when she wanted others to protect her from feelings she could not name. Mom came to speak with me after dinner. She sat on the edge of my bed and said that Selena was going through a very difficult time emotionally, that the world felt overwhelming for her, that my announcement might have felt like a reminder of everything she was struggling with. I listened in silence. Mom asked me if I would consider declining the speech just this once to keep the atmosphere of the house calm. She spoke gently, as if reason alone should be enough for me to understand. I realized that her request was not a suggestion. It was an expectation wrapped in concern. I told her no. The word felt heavy, not loud, not angry, but final in a way I had never allowed myself to be before. Mom stared at me as though I had said something obscene. She repeated her request slower, as if I had not understood. When I refused again, her expression darkened. She left my room without closing the door. I listened to her footsteps descend the hallway, and I felt something shift inside the house, something I could not undo. Dad spoke to me later in the living room. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking somewhere just past my shoulder. He said that sometimes sacrifices keep peace, that choosing family meant choosing harmony. His voice was calm, but his eyes avoided mine. I understood that he was not asking for my thoughts. He was asking for compliance. I told him I had already made my decision. There was a long silence between us before he nodded once and walked away. The house felt smaller after that. Meals were quiet. Selena avoided my gaze entirely. Mom spoke to me only when necessary. Dad acted as though everything was normal while refusing to acknowledge the shift that had taken place. I continued writing my speech late at night in my room, the only time I felt like I could breathe without someone watching for a reaction. I realized during those nights that I had never been allowed to exist without adjusting myself to fit the emotional shape of the household. This was the first time I had chosen not to shrink. The air felt thin, but it was mine. Graduation morning began with a stillness that did not last. I woke up early expecting the usual nervous excitement that most seniors feel when they are about to leave one part of life behind. Instead, there was a strange tension in the air, something heavy enough that even the sunlight felt muted. I sat at the edge of my bed and tried to steady myself, thinking about my speech, my classmates, and the moment I had imagined for so long. I had rehearsed every word, hoping it would be a bridge into the future I worked for. I did not know that everything would collapse before I reached that stage. I walked down the hallway and saw Selena sitting at the kitchen table with her head lowered into her hands. She was breathing unevenly, letting out soft whimpers and rubbing her temples as though she could barely hold herself together. Mom stood behind her, rubbing her shoulders with exaggerated care, whispering things about how delicate she was feeling. When I stepped closer, Selena lifted her eyes just enough to meet mine, and there was a quiet accusation already there. Something rehearsed, something purposeful. Mom turned toward me before I could speak and said that Selena had barely slept, that she was dizzy, that the stress of everything had overwhelmed her. She had already decided what my role would be without asking. When I mentioned graduation, Mom's expression changed, as though I had committed a selfish act by even remembering it. She told me that I would need to stay home to watch over Selena at least until she felt stable. She said that family should come first and that the ceremony could not matter more than the well-being of my sister. I felt something fracture inside me, something that had been held together far longer than I realized. For the first time, I said no. The word felt foreign in my mouth, but it came out steady. Mom stared in disbelief, and Selena inhaled sharply, drawing attention to herself again. Within minutes, she was crying loudly, clutching her chest, insisting she could not breathe unless I stayed near her. Mom immediately shifted from shock to anger. She accused me of being cold and ungrateful, of chasing recognition at the expense of compassion. I tried to explain that I had worked toward this day for years, but my voice disappeared under their noise. In the middle of this, my phone vibrated. Selena had posted on social media already. The caption claimed that I was abandoning her when she was at her weakest. The comments began appearing in real time, each one chipping at my composure. Friends from school began messaging me, asking what was happening, asking how I could leave my sister like that. I did not know how to respond because there was nothing I could say that people would believe over tears and dramatic suffering. Despite everything, I left the house. I walked toward the car with my cap and gown in hand, telling myself that I had to choose myself just once. I made it to the school parking lot. I could see the stage. I could hear students gathering. I took one step toward the entrance and Dad appeared beside me. He did not yell, but his words struck harder than any raised voice. He said that I was breaking the family, that Mom could not handle the stress, that Selena needed unity. He placed his hand on my shoulder and guided me back toward the car. I felt powerless again, the familiar pattern swallowing me whole. When we returned, I could barely stand. I sat on the porch steps and held myself together by force alone. That was when Aunt Evelyn arrived. She looked at me carefully, really looked. She did not ask what happened. She simply said, "Come with me." And I realized it was the first time in a long while that someone had chosen me. 2 weeks later, I began to understand what peace could feel like. Living with my Aunt Evelyn was unlike anything I had known before. She did not hover, judge, or measure my reactions against someone else's. The house was small, and the days passed quietly, filled with the soft rhythm of ordinary life. I helped her water the garden in the mornings, cooked simple meals, and took long walks to a nearby nature trail. There was space to think, to breathe, and to let my mind mend in its own slow way. For the first time, silence did not feel like the punishment I had grown up with. It felt like recovery. Evelyn never pushed me to talk. She simply let me be, and each day I loosened the knots in my chest a little more. I started journaling, writing things I had never dared to say out loud. I wrote about how it felt to always be the one expected to bend, the one expected to smooth over every conflict, the one expected to sacrifice herself for the sake of harmony that never actually existed. In those pages, I began to recognize my own exhaustion and, with it, a quiet anger. Not loud, not destructive, just real. One afternoon, Noah came by. It was the only time he visited during those weeks. He stood outside the porch, shifting slightly as though unsure whether he was welcome. His expression was gentle but cautious. He told me that school had been asking where I was, that some people were confused about what had happened at graduation. He did not try to comfort or persuade or explain away anything. He simply delivered what information he had and waited to see if I wanted to respond. I appreciated that silence between us more than any attempt to soften the truth. When he left, I realized I did not feel pulled back toward who I used to be. I was moving forward slowly but clearly. The unraveling began on a Tuesday. I woke to Evelyn calling me into the living room, her phone in her hand and her brows drawn together. She handed it to me without speaking. On the screen was a social media post made by Selena's closest friend. The caption accused Selena of faking her emotional breakdowns to gain sympathy and attention. The post included screenshots of conversations where Selena admitted to exaggerating her condition and spoke about enjoying the control it gave her. Then came the video. It showed Selena at a spa, laughing, sipping a smoothie, and posing for pictures just 3 days after the ceremony she claimed she was too weak to endure. The comments beneath the post were brutal. The same people who once defended her were turning sharply questioning every story she had ever cried through. Some wrote that they felt manipulated. Others expressed embarrassment for supporting her blindly. The tone shifted from sympathy to suspicion faster than I had ever seen. By the end of the day, her workplace had issued a statement requesting her temporary leave while investigating the situation. Reputation had always mattered deeply to her, and it was slipping away quickly and publicly. My parents did not escape the backlash either. People questioned them for defending her so fiercely, for attacking me without asking questions, for enabling every collapse she staged. Neighbors whispered, extended relatives called. Their carefully maintained image of a united and admirable family was crumbling as openly as Selena's. I watched all of this unfold from Evelyn's kitchen table. I did not feel triumph, nor relief, nor revenge. I simply felt distance. The world that once defined me was now happening without me, untangling itself into something I no longer needed to carry. And in that quiet, I realized that I had begun to build something that belonged only to me. 1 month had passed, and the distance between me and the house I grew up in felt like an entirely different lifetime. Living with my Aunt Evelyn had given me space to breathe, and the quiet around me revealed how loud everything inside that house had been. I woke each day without bracing myself for an emotional storm, without checking the tone of footsteps in the hallway, without calculating how I should speak to avoid triggering another dramatic collapse from my sister. I felt a steadiness return to my chest, something I had not realized I had been missing for years. During that month, I heard about the state of my former home only through others, mostly through whispers that reached me whether I wanted them or not. My sister Selena had become even more dependent on my mother. The emotional outbursts that had once been occasional were now frequent, unpredictable, and exhausting for everyone around her. My mother stayed at her side constantly, and every attempt to leave the room resulted in accusations of abandonment. Without the family's previous balance, my mother no longer had anyone to redirect the pressure to. I used to be that pressure valve. I had taken that role silently for so long that they never understood what removing me would do. My father tried to repair their public image. He had always cared deeply about how the family appeared to neighbors, relatives, church members, anyone who might be watching. But this time, his efforts could not keep up with the speed at which everything unraveled. After Selena's deception was exposed online, the comments did not fade. Screenshots resurfaced, video clips circulated. People recognized the patterns they had ignored for years. The story lost its novelty, but the reputation damage remained like a permanent stain. My father began working longer hours, maybe to avoid being home, maybe to escape the shame, maybe both. I heard that my parents tried to explain the situation to relatives, insisting that Selena was simply misunderstood, and that I had left because I was too sensitive. Their explanations did not land as cleanly as they expected. Most of the relatives had seen enough to piece together the truth. They began to distance themselves quietly but clearly, offering polite silence rather than support. Eventually, my parents reached out to me, first through calls, then through long messages about forgiveness, unity, and what it means to remain family. Their words sounded warm on the surface, but underneath I could feel the urgency. They did not want to apologize. They wanted to restore the family image. I reread each message carefully. Not once did they ask how I was doing. Not once did they acknowledge what happened on my graduation day. Not once did they take responsibility. My silence was intentional and calm. I did not block them. I did not respond. I simply allowed the gap to remain where it needed to be. I had learned something valuable during that month. Peace is not something someone can hand you. It is something you choose and maintain. Evelyn never interfered. She did not tell me to forgive them, nor to cut them off completely. She simply supported my growth. She asked about my goals. She encouraged my independence. She gave me a space where I was not the second priority. By the end of that month, I realized I had stepped out of a life where love was conditional and into one where I could define my own worth. I no longer felt the need to return, explain myself, or justify my choices. My life was mine now, and I planned to keep it that way. I began to understand stability not as something dramatic or overwhelming, but as something quietly built day by day. Living with my Aunt Evelyn gave me a rhythm that felt steady and human. I woke each morning without tension waiting behind my ribs. I worked part-time at a small community center, and I cooked dinner with Evelyn in the evenings while we talked about books or travel, or nothing particularly important. That ordinary consistency became something precious. I rented a small studio of my own after several months. It was modest, but the space felt deeply mine. I furnished it slowly with things that reflected my own taste instead of what others believed I should like. A simple desk near the window, a soft rug, a plant that I watered every morning. Every choice was my own, and that made even the smallest detail feel meaningful. I kept my phone notifications muted. Messages from Mom came occasionally, usually carefully worded, pretending as if everything had simply drifted apart on its own. They spoke of holidays, family gatherings, old memories, but none of the messages expressed understanding, apology, or growth. I recognized that they were reaching out to restore the image of a complete family, not to repair the damage or acknowledge the harm. I read the messages and set the phone aside without replying. My silence was not coldness, it was clarity. I had spent years believing that if I just proved my value hard enough, they would finally recognize it. I no longer felt the need to be seen by people who had chosen not to see me. Selena did not reach out directly. I heard through others that her emotional storms had not quieted, and Mom continued to bend her entire world around supporting those outbursts. Dad tried to hold their public life together, but carried exhaustion heavily. I felt no satisfaction in this knowledge. There was no victory in watching others struggle. There was simply separation. I walked forward while they remained where they had always been. My life moved at a different pace now. I was building something slow, genuine, and free. I did not return to the old house, and I no longer imagined a future where I needed their approval. My peace was quiet, but it was mine. Sometimes the people who shape us the most are the ones we must eventually walk away from. Love cannot survive in environments where our worth is constantly questioned or traded against someone else's needs. Healing begins when we choose ourselves without apology, when we recognize that loyalty does not require self-erasure. A healthy family does not demand silence, sacrifice, or invisibility. We deserve relationships where our presence is valued, not negotiated. Thank you for listening to my story until the end. I shared it because I know many people carry quiet wounds from the place they were told was home. If any part of this resonated with you, I would truly appreciate hearing your thoughts or experiences. Your voice matters here. Feel free to share in the comments